You know, I've been eyeballing this podium all morning because, quite frankly, God played a cruel joke on me by making me get up here and do this. But, you know, if I stand here, I look like a refrigerator with a head on it. If I stand here, I'll probably do a J-Lo and go right off the edge here. So hopefully I'll survive here. So just wanted to talk about bulk wine a little bit. And I think Kurt said something really very meaningful, is that, you know, from the winemaker's perspective, is that you're looking at bulk wine and wine as the first priority. And really, it's the last thing you should look at. Everybody walks through our door many, many times and says, okay, I've got this idea for doing this, and I need to buy the wine, I need to buy it now. And we've had this happen numerous times. And you know, some projects take 2 or 3 years to get off the ground. If they had bought that wine 2 or 3 years, it's already old. So we should be the last stop on your hit parade when you're planning a new product. So let's see. Okay, so what I thought we'd do is, kind of in a form of an agenda, is some of the things that we know that are going on in the marketplace right now. And I think Jen took really great view from branding and up above from that 30,000 foot level, and Kurt brought it down to what's really practical in terms of making a sale to a retailer, to a distributor, et cetera. And I'll take kind of a mid-level view point, and we'll cover everything from the brands, the marketing, the retailers, the competition, and go through all of it. But things that we do know. We know that global production is up. After a really disastrous 2017-16 harvest season around the world where things were really low, we've really come back, and I'll show you a slide on that. We also know that global consumption is flat, and that competition is expanding. And it's competition that I'll show you some pictures of that has nothing to do with wine, but has everything to do with beverage alcohol, and the competition that's building. Bulk wine continues to move around the world. It's easy to do. It's very safe. Moving it in flexis, totes, whatever, through our friends in the freight forwarding business, do a great job at making sure that wine gets there safe and ready for bottling. All the countries that we're going to discuss, we're going to go through, 6 or 7 countries today. They all have opportunities. They all have risks. An example, China is continuing to pound away at consumption and growing the consumption, but the U.S. is still a huge market. So I'm very happy to see my Australian friends here that where they've been very successful in China and have doubled down on China. They're here looking back to the United States to make another entry point. Consolidation is happening at all levels. Distribution, wineries, retailers, you go down the list, there's consolidation all around. The consumer is changing. I'm the old fart in the room now. I don't know how that happened. I don't know when it happened, but it happened. And so after the baby boomers come the millennials, and we'll take a look, and then I didn't even know there was a Gen Z until you started looking around, and here they are. And finally, we'll look at some opportunities that might be there, especially here in the U.S. where we're a little chock-a-block full of wine at the moment, and we'll take a look at some opportunities, but speed is critical to get to market. So I thought we'd start with this graphic from the OIV, where it kind of shows where global grape, and certainly the purple is the wine production that is there. And you can kind of really see that, out of Europe, I mean, we intuitively know this, but out of Europe, South America, and the US, that's really where the bulk is coming from. Okay, you do have Australia, South Africa, but we all hear a lot about China, but a lot of it is in table grapes. So at the moment, we're not too concerned about the volumes, but they are growing as well. So I said earlier that global wine production is up. Okay, and if you take a look here, especially in France, Italy, and Spain, the big three, you can see that in 2017 the harvest was significantly reduced. And so for the first time in history on a global basis, we almost reached consumption. So I want to say that again. We're always overproducing. Okay, so we finally hit something a little lower. So just focus on that for a minute. You can see the rest of the country is relatively flat in terms of their production. So the question is, where does it all go? And here is a great graphic that I got out of the Wine Gourd blog, and they take a look at this, and so you can see where wines move around the globe. Spain to France, Italy to Germany. These are all wine countries. They're trading in and out of wine, okay, for their consumers while they're exporting at the same time. So the wine moves around the world very easily through the process. Quick graphic on global acreage trends. My partner Glenn Proctor put this together to kind of show you where things are moving around the world in terms of grapes. We're expanding in China, Chile, and New Zealand. We're shrinking in the other areas of the world. Are we shrinking because of demand? Maybe. Are we shrinking because of more productive vineyards? Possibly. But it does tend to move up and down. Other crops may get in the way. Certainly we've seen here in this California a need for almonds. And so we've taken a lot of acreage, turned it into almonds. Those almonds get moved around the world at the same way wine does. Okay, so it's a competitive thing. Moving back to consumption, just want to kind of raise the point that the US, Italy is increasing in consumption, which is interesting, and China is the big growers of where the consumption is going. So these two markets, very powerful, very big markets and growing markets, are the places for wineries that have global production that see these as targets. So here's a graphic that I mentioned a little earlier, the global supply and demand. That in 2017, we almost hit the level of consumption, and we looked at ourselves as woefully short. Now, a lot of this wine ends up in distillate or other areas, vinegars, things like that. But when you're really looking at it, we finally got close 1 year ago, and now we're back up high. So it's not surprising that we would have some oversupplied areas as well as some undersupplied areas. Next 9 or so slides are going to deal with countries of origin, and they're all set up exactly the same. There'll be a key highlight, some pricing, opportunities, and risks. 2018 is what I said last year at this time. I think the focal point on some of these will be price, and on others will be the risks or opportunities associated thereof. So in Argentina, they were short for several years, as we saw in a previous slide. And so you had a lot of people leaving the market. So Malbec, which was their big driver, obviously, it shrank down to virtually nothing, and they lost the ability to sell outside the country. This happened for several years in a row. The first couple of years, the price went dramatically up, and everybody said, okay, well, I'll just pay more for the wine. The second year, there wasn't enough wine, so they started to find other substitutes. Did they go to Chile for Malbec? Did they start growing their own Malbec? What did they do there? And subsequently, you've seen that Argentina has fallen off kind of the face of the earth in terms of the people that are importing this wine into specifically this market. And ultimately, you've seen that the price has come down significantly because they kind of lost the consumer. We're seeing a similar thing that I'll get to with South Africa as they head into their third year of drought and they don't have the supply to meet the demand. Which way am I going here? Blue. We're just going to stay in Argentina for a while. Is this thing moving? Okay. I don't want to keep pressing it because it'll be 17 slides later. Welcome to the IBWSS, just in case anybody. So let's think here. As we go through, what I will say is we'll get to a slide about China, but we can move to that since everybody seems to want to go there. So this year there was another bulk wine show earlier this year, and Argentina, Chile, Australia, very present and omnipresent at these shows. So you can see where these suppliers are going in. The U.S. going to have a lot of trouble in China for stuff we're more expensive than most every other country in terms of our bulk wine, and ultimately. Okay, no problem. And ultimately, with the tariffs and other things that are going on, it'll be quite some time before we try to import more wines over to China. If we go around the world, I think we can just kind of imagine these country flags to do that. If we take a look at France, here they had low harvest coming into this year, but they had a very good 2018. For 2019, it's been extremely hot in the south of France, where the majority of their bulk wine comes from. And so we're starting to see things like prices rise and supplies fall. Certainly their big heavy hitter is Provence rosés at the moment, and that continues to grow. We've imported more than 1 million cases of Provence rosé to date, and so it continues to be a major driver for France. Spain, I think they too are suffering from a little bit of drought and the heat. So as the climate changes and as things move around, we're going to see these countries kind of come in and out of the cycles of wine. Italy, has had a lot of Prosecco growth, a lot of Pinot Grigio growth, and so we're seeing that the prices on them are coming down from those lofty highs that they've had. If we move to New Zealand, I see, I've got a friend here in the room from New Zealand, or that represents a New Zealand winery, and they've done an excellent job of making Sauvignon Blanc a single horse variety for one country that has continued to defy most people's expectations, if you think about it. And we have a tremendous amount of supply already coming into the country, but it still maintains a very high price. So they would like to grow the Pinot Noir or grow some things from the North Island, but that has yet to happen because they too have to deal with the competitiveness that's happening around the world. If we move over to Australia, as I said earlier, I applaud people for coming over all this way to look back at the U.S. market. Brand Australia became Yellowtail, and the rest of every brand fell off the face of the earth here. They were very steadfast in their belief that their wines are of great quality and they can move them to other places, and they put lots of bets into China, and that's paid off very handsomely. So a lesson for everybody that wants to go to China, they should take it from the Australians of how to see a market that kind of fell on its face here in the U.S. The UK really didn't pick up the ball in terms of volume for them, and they went off and hit another market and did a very successful job there of building Australian wines. Thank God. So I've already done most of my speech here, but it's okay. We do this. So as I said, in Chile, you'll see a lot of these slides. You won't see a tremendous amount of movement in the pricing, but Chile had a very decent harvest, and they want to move back into China. So this is competition for Australia at the moment. And they've been very successful in the past, but having the short harvest leading up to that drove them out of China, where they kept the U.S. going. And I think that's paid off for them because we've maintained wine in the U.S. sales. But they have a little shorter supply on Chardonnay and Pinot Grigio this year, and the question is whether their average rainfall is a little lower. Something that we've taken note as we've looked around the world at things is weather patterns. Chile and the U.S. tend to follow similar weather patterns, which is kind of odd. But if you fold the world in half, I guess we're on the same parallel, and things look that way. So we might look at this winter to have a little lower rainfall at the moment. So it's just something to think about for the future. As I said, in New Zealand, they've done a very good job of maintaining the Sauvignon Blanc as a high point for them, but they do have consistent supply and they do have consistent demand. But I would also say that here in the U.S., the major four players, whether that's Gallo, the Wine Group, Treasury, and Consolidation, have the majority of the sales of those wines in this country. So that's up to them. Vineyard land is getting to be scarce down there, and so the question is whether supply constraints will stay. And the only thing at the moment is the exchange rate that's keeping the price very similar to the way it was last year. Certainly prices have risen on the bulk market in New Zealand, but the exchange rate's keeping them competitive here. Australia, as I said, they've bet on China very heavily. But if there's a China slowdown, this could be a risk for them. It's getting more competitive in China. The consumer is getting much more better educated, let's put it that way, as a result of Australia making a lot of educational moves to bring people and the middle class kind of up to speed on what quality wines are. And then we'll see another slide here about what the future of Australia might hold, because these were this year's grape prices. And so on the previous slide, you saw that the price really hadn't changed year over year. But based on this latest information that's come out of Australia, grape prices have been significantly rising over the past 3 years. And this will have an effect on their bulk wine. It will have an effect on what they want to charge in China as well. So it's been a good market for them, but it could have potential risks. South Africa, as I said, you know, they're running the risk. Last year, they had a lot of demand high because they had low inventories. This year, the demand is down because they've been out of inventory. So people have moved on to other areas for what to do. So when South Africa does have a good harvest, they're going to have to find another way to get back into the market. Italy, as I said, you know, Prosecco has been doing very well. You'll see prices have come down on Prosecco, but we've really opened up the market for that. And there could be some trade tariffs that affect things if the orange one continues his efforts. If we look at France, as I said, it was very hot, but rosé demand continues to be up, and France continues to grow. Spain, I mentioned that earlier about global demand. One of the interesting things on the global demand was that South Africa bought a tremendous amount of generic whites out of Spain to kind of keep their consumers drinking wine. So that's another aspect that we'll get to later, is keeping the consumer drinking wine versus drinking White Claw or other seltzers or beverages that we'll discuss. China, as I said, you know, again, they continue to grow. There's lots of new players that are entering into the marketplace there, both for beer, wine, and spirits, and so they continue to grow. So California, where we sit at the moment, you know, it's a little on the tough side just because we have a lot of excess wine, and we'll continue to have that until we drink our way through it. But I'm not so sure that we have a supply problem, because even though the harvest was good size, I really think it's more of a demand-related issue. We have lots of competition for these products, lots of global competition coming in, and so we end up with a little bit of a supply issue that we'll just have to drink our way through. And here's another graphic just to kind of show you what's happened in the bulk wine supply from January, and everything with the exception of the last bar graph is May. And this kind of shows the growth in bulk wine year over year based on the 4 varieties, Cabernet, Chardonnay, Merlot, Pinot Noir, and Zin. Sorry, 5 varieties. And you can see why we might have a little bit of a problem here, because we've grown inventories of bulk wine while sales have been relatively flat. And to speak earlier, imports continue to grow. Okay, so domestic wine shipments stay flat, packaged and bulk imports continue to grow. So speaking on some other areas where we touch bases with a lot of wineries around the world, is that there's been consolidation at all levels, as I said earlier. So if you take a look at from 1995 to 2016, we went from 1,800 wineries to 9,800 wineries. At the same time, we shrank distributors from 3,000 to 675. Okay, so we've really created a lot of competition in and of ourselves in a much smaller range, just by expansion. Expansion. The top 9 suppliers have 77% of the share of volume that are sold. And this assumes that Gallo completes the purchase with Consolidation. Okay, but you can kind of see there'll be 27%, Wine Group at 16%, Consolidation still at 12%, and down from there. Distributors continue to consolidate. Even though we're at 675, you really are at the big 3 at the moment. And with rumors that Breakthrough and Republic will merge in the near future, we'll be at the big 2. And this creates a lot of competition. At the grocery and retail outlet, the top 10 retailers control 60% of grocery sales. So this is a huge industry that continues to consolidate and makes it, again, a little bit tougher to reach the consumer when you're having to go through less and less outlets. Oops, sorry about that. So here's the top 15 retailers, just in case you didn't know that some of these other brands were underneath the names. So Kroger has Fred Meyer and Ralph's and Food for Less. So when somebody's out there, when you're out there trying to sell your product to these retailers, it makes it a very competitive environment to sell through. And they're big companies. Same thing with restaurants. National chain restaurants are all coming under other headers. So, yes, it's one less sales call, but how many sales calls can one buyer take when somebody walks through the door? If you're big and you get some attention, or you've got a brand that requires some attention or demands some attention, you may get your appointment. But if you're walking in with something that's new or different or unique, and I think as Kurt said it, the wine, that's the ante in this game, okay? It has to be good wine. You can't walk in with anything less than that these days. So the wine market, while still growing, is growing at a much slower rate. Whether that rate is because people are drinking less wine or because people are just drinking other beverages, which we'll discuss in a minute, is yet to be seen. But we're growing. The good part is we're growing. It just happens to be slow, but it is on a big base. So when we sit at 400 plus million cases of wine, growing at 1%, it's another 4 million cases. So we'll take that. On the negative side, alcohol consumption is flat. And as we'll see in a little bit, it's actually a lot of movement there for zero alcohol, low alcohol, non-alcoholic drinks completely. So again, it creates a bit of a squeeze effect on what we're doing in the beverage alcohol space for wine. Direct to consumer, another positive, but it's still a slowing game. Okay, we've had good growth in wineries moving directly into the consumer. Lots of cases of wine, lots of dollars in sales, but it becomes a little tougher market as well. So shelf space is at a premium, and I think if you take a look at this graphic, yes, I pasted a couple of pictures together, but how do you tell what to drink? I mean, you stand and I think we do a really lousy job in this country in particular. We do better jobs if you go to Sweden. Their market is really, granted, it's one retailer, the monopoly that you have to go through, and it's challenging to get in. But when you go to their stores, all the shelves are no higher than this, which is great. It's really good, not only for me. Okay, but what's really great about it is you see people shopping across the store, and that crowd mentality tends to come in, and you see people picking it up, and you go, why is everybody crowded over there picking up this wine? They go over there, they see that wine, they go in, and it's trial. Okay, so how do you stand out in this type of field when the shelf is 8 feet tall? As I said earlier, lots of options. These are just alcoholic options that are there in the center, but you can't forget the coffees, you can't forget the waters, you can't forget any of the other beverages that are out there. And it's as the old saying goes, it's share of stomach. Okay, and we have to share all of this space, and we're fighting for all this space. So, you have to have more than a unique package. You have to have something more that you're offering the consumer, and whether that's what Jen talked about with the emotions of things, or how you're going to hit that consumer, it's all part of the process. Let's see, did I miss something? No. Okay, so in a sense, wrapping things up a little bit, who are all these consumers, right? We have baby boomers. So we stand there. This is a big expansion of time that we had these consumers, and we've been able to successfully market to these consumers because we were these consumers. Okay, and now we stand here as the old farts in the group doing this, looking at these next generations, saying, what is it that we should do? We can't count on brand loyalty as much anymore. We can't count on people saying that money is the most important factor. And so, and people shop online, they don't go to the store. I still go to the store, wander the shelves, lose myself at a Costco on a Saturday. That's not done as much. So the Gen Xers, what do they like? right? So here's another 15-year period of people. They're self-professed savers. I'm not sure I 100% believe that, but because they seem to be saving out of my wallet, but that's okay. But they seek other things that are more important. And seemingly, as we go through this, we'll see that more people tend to go through what experiences in their life versus what they're saving on a bottle of wine or anything else. Millennials, we like to, talk a lot about the millennials, and they're really driving a big wall, in a sense, between what the baby boomers and Gen Xers were and where the future is going. So all the brands that you see growing, whether it's craft beers, and you see the companies that advertise are really focused on this group. And one of the things that is interesting about the low alcohol movement is that I don't know if anybody's seen the commercial for Smirnoff vodka, where they have Ted Danson, and he walks up to the bar and he's ordering a teeny martini, and it's about this big, and the whole thing is about moderation. The whole thing is about not drinking. And here's an alcohol company, a hard alcohol company, talking about low alcohol consumption. So it's a very interesting twist on how people are looking at things. And then, finally, we look at Generation Z. These are the people born in 1996 and later. They have a lot of purchasing power. They're going to have a lot of money there, and they're a large group of the population. Yet, they don't want some of the things that we held dear. That Coca-Cola ad may not be what these people want if they're not into the sugary drinks. Maybe there's the emotion of Coke, and Coke is certainly more than just Coca-Cola these days. As it's into waters, as it's into other beverages, as it looks into getting into the spirits game. But they spend a lot of time online. They're looking at anything with CBD. Very interesting for Thursday's CBD cannabis show here with Sid. That it just kind of blew up, and people are very interested. Less people concerned about wine, more people or alcoholic beverages, more people looking at cannabis and CBDs, etc. So it's a very interesting dynamic as we grow. So here's another thing about cannabis customers, right? They're younger, they have higher incomes, they don't have kids, or they have kids later. And I thought this was a really interesting statistic in 2017. 6.1 billion dollars was spent on diapers, 9.2 spent on cannabis, and it's not even legal. Okay, federally. Okay, so it's amazing what it is. So we're having less kids, and maybe pot has something to do with it. I don't know. So let's get to where the opportunity might be now. So let's look varietally real quick. Cabernet, it's number one. It will continue to be number one, and it continues to outsell Chardonnay by a lot of margin, and it continues to grow. And the plus side of it is we have a lot of it. Okay, Chardonnay was the last one into the planting regime, so we have less Chardonnay on stream. We have a lot more Cabernet to sell. So create those Cabernet programs or Cabernet blends, etc. But don't try to blend Merlot in, because we punched Merlot in the face for 15 years. It's been 15 years since the Sideways movie came out, right? 15 years it took us to kill Merlot, and now everybody wants it. So go figure. Pinot Noir, sales could surpass Pinot Grigio shortly, and as the number 4 ranking varietal. So it's something to look for, and we have plenty of that as well. Finally, Rosé. Rosé is here to stay. France obviously drove a lot of volume into the market, and this is not your white zin. Okay, so that white zin part continues to fall down. Okay, but dry rosés, and if you go to the shelf, you're going to find a lot of rosés out there. Okay, but unfortunately, as we'll get to with the can trend, there's probably going to be a lot of dead bodies along the way, because everybody's creating these products. Are they really all wanted, or is it Provence rosé that's in demand? Oh, here we go again. Oh, crushing. Oh, here we go. I've done it. So let's see if it catches up. I was going to say something about sustainability. So obviously, you have a lot of consumers are very focused on sustainability. A lot of these Gen Xers, Gen Zs, millennials, very into what this is. You know, it used to be when I was working with Fetzer and making Bonterra, you know, we had to fight the grower to be sustainable, to be organic, to be doing that. It's still a fight, okay? But if you're a grower out there, you really have to pay attention to this, because this movement is bigger now than it ever has been, and it's in Europe, and so if you want to sell into Europe, you have to be sustainable, organic, and they're growing a lot faster than we are in terms of their sustainability. And I think something that's important right down there at the bottom, 1/3 of all consumers buy brands on social environmental impact, and that continues to grow. So we can't just sit there and bury our heads in the sand anymore and say, oh, well, they'll look past it because we have a nice package. And as I said, yes, we can. You know, canned wine, it's more than a fad. It's a big, big category. And I would say we get at least one call a day of somebody that's going to grow another can brand. And they've got the answer to the canning thing. But as I said, there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. And you want to be on the winner side, but there's going to be a lot of dead bodies along the way. So be careful in the cans. So some key takeaways. You know, be innovative and be creative. You know, I heard this morning that Precept Brands, with their house wine bag-in-box, has done a collaboration with Kellogg's, and they are launching with their Cheez-It brand, a brand that's 98 years old and has grown, you know, out of fashion, so on and so forth. So they're looking to re-energize that brand, and so they have wine pairings with cheese. You can have your box wine of Argentinian Malbec, along with a certain smoked Cheez-It in there. Now, it may be crazy, it may work like a charm, but you got to be creative. Premiumization, as Kurt said, is happening at all levels, whether that's in an alternative packaging or not, right? In Sweden, 62% of the market is boxed wine, and it's good boxed wine. So I don't think we should look at boxes as a negative. I think we should look at it as a tremendous positive, because the quality of wine that's being put in the box is good, and it's better for the environment, better for ease of transport, ease of use. Sustainability, the consumer wants a reason to buy, as we said earlier. Understanding the consumer trends, right? You know, social influences and users create the content, as Jen spoke about. It's not us creating the content for them, they're creating the content. So you have to embrace those technologies, whether that's Instagram or Twitter or whatever for your thing. Direct-to-consumer growth, you know, you have to create the experience beyond the tasting room. I think it's critical that things move outside of where we bring them in. Not everybody can make it to the wine regions around the world. Data and education. You know, I think there's more artificial intelligence companies trying to grab hold of things and take our data, which is valuable information, whether that's in the field or whether that's, you know, in the branding. It's a important part. And finally, we have to have a little bit of a united front, because alcohol is under attack for that. And there's lots of alternatives, as we spoke about earlier, and alcohol is not necessarily considered a healthy choice. Ironically, we used to talk about alcohol as a health thing back in the late 1800s. And here we are 100 years later, and it's cannabis, so go figure. So as my friend, as I look over here, Matt Henderson, this is for him, because, you know, early to bed, early to rise, work like hell and advertise. This is his credo, as I see it. So if you have any more information that you'd like to do, please take a look. You can subscribe to our World Report, which comes out every month and kind of gives you a view around the world, or the California Report, which gives you a more in-depth view here in California. Thanks a lot.
We do have time for a few questions. We're sending a mic around, so just wait for a second so you can have a mic. Thank you, guys.
How you doing? What do you think the market is for sweet wines in the United States, or especially like higher quality sweet wines?
You know, I think that the market is not as good at the moment for sweet wines. And you're not talking dessert wines, you're talking just a sweeter level of wine. I think we've had, you know, the 8 gram of sugar type of thing. That's kind of the standard for dryness these days. So if you're going to look up from there, I think you have to get to the health conscious folks that are looking at calories as problematic. And the taste styles, we've kind of trained everybody to that level, but that's what's seen more as dry. But I think the trend is to get away from sweetness rather than increase it.
We can do one more question if anyone has one.
Okay.
All set for now.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay.